welcome back to another episode of
Deca Debrief.
Today on the podcast we have Miniguy again.
Hello again.
The first thing I'd like to discuss is the Deca Games DMCA Takedown of Revenge of the Fallen. What was your guys' initial response to it?
So we actually had a few different possible cases laid out for how Deca was going to respond. You know, a lot of private servers have always existed over the years, right? And Deca or Wild Shadow or Kabam, all three of these companies have pretty much always kept a let's not talk about it mentality, where they don't take us offline, they don't deal with any of the players who are playing them, they just keep, they're their own thing, let's leave them alone. So the only reason we felt that Deca was likely to actually take any action against us, or take any action, with us, would be if we actually reached out to them ourselves. And we had actually done that. So we were looking at releasing to other platforms, including potentially on Steam once we had finished our Unity port. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that all of our content is actually licensed to us. We need to make sure that's all airtight, or they're never going to let us release that on Steam, right, or any of these platforms. So we reached out to Deca through their actual official partnership email and looked to get a license, whether through a royalty or a flat fee or something to that effect, to use their sprites and a little bit of their other content in our game while we phased it out and made it truly our own. The cases that we laid out, or the scenarios that we laid out for the ways they might respond, were basically these three things. Number one was they actually say yes, and we either pay, a flat fee or a royalty or something like that to use their sprites, right? Number two was they say no, and potentially follow it up with a DMCA takedown or a cease and desist or something to that effect. And number three was they say nothing. And number three was the worst possible case, because the number three situation doesn't give us any, affirmative information on is what we're doing okay? Can we move forward with our current planning, right? So that was the worst case scenario. The second option, which is the DMCA, was actually not the worst case scenario, because we said, well, if that happens, we'll remove all of their content and we'll make it our own game. If that's what happens, that's what happens. And we knew that was a possibility when we contacted them. We hoped for the best, but we knew it was a possibility. Unfortunately, the second case did come to pass, and our reaction was, dang, really? I think me, Mike, and Skilly, all three of us were in a chat at the time, and we noticed that our main web server was offline. We were like, oh, that must be the DMCA. And it was definitely, I wouldn't say a shock, but it was surprising, because we actually had been talking to some people at Deca prior to this, and it seemed like the talks were actually going really well to forge an official partnership. So it was surprising to us, because it was almost a complete 180. We had contact with some people at Deca, and then I want to say after about a month of talking to them and being in what seemed like good negotiations, they went silent for a few weeks, and then we were hit with the DMCA.
Do you guys resent Deca Games in any way for the decision they made, or do you think that it was understandable, that it was completely within their right legally and morally?
It's certainly completely within their right legally. I have no qualms with that. I don't think anyone on our team does. And I don't even think any of our players do. I think everyone understands that as much as we did work our asses off to make our, RotF a standalone game and its own experience and what we thought was a better experience, we also, I think, all know that it was a private server, and those things are unauthorized, and they are, prone to be shut down as soon as the company that owns the actual content decides to shut them down. I don't think anyone disagrees with the idea that it was within their legal rights. Now, was it within their moral rights, or was it morally right? That's a hard question, right? I think if they had just, from the beginning, shut us down, that's morally fine. And I think if we had reached out to them and they had said no, and then even then shut us down, even that would be well within their moral rights. The fact that we got kind of, led on to believe that this was going to be a possible partnership, and then the complete, radio silence into a 180 of shutdown, I mean, that definitely feels a little bit scummy to me. But we also understand that this is technically, officially an industry, right? This is what happens when there is a potential clash of interest. And while it's definitely unfortunate, I don't think we have any super, super hard feelings about it. It does make mostly both legal and moral sense. The one thing I do have questions about is whether it actually makes, business sense or corporate sense. I do think that RotF was relatively successful for what it was. And I actually think that Deca would have done us a big favor by partnering with us. But I also think that we could have helped them out in a lot of things. I think, part of why RotF again was successful was that, at least when it was online, it was an alternative to Realm of the Mad God that a lot of people really, really liked. And I thought that actually our team could really share some of that success, and also some of what we've done and some of our strategies and some of the gameplay that we've made to make their game better. So I think it is a bit of a lost opportunity for both parties. But it's certainly within their legal rights. It's arguably within their moral rights, and it's disappointing to all of us. But I don't think I I don't think any of us are really, really, really upset about it.
So would you say that your relationship with Deca Games from this point on is positive?
Hard to say. It's certainly competitive now, right? It's certainly competitive. I mean, we are, no matter what happens, we're going to exist now in the same space. And, in this multiplayer permadeath bullet hell question mark space.
Question mark.
Well, yeah, right? I mean, it's a bullet hell, but some of it's just nonsense. No flame. Like, any bullet hell that features this much healing isn't what I typically think of when I think of a bullet hell. It's still a bullet hell, don't get me wrong. But, I tend to think of like a Gungeon type game where if you get hit once, that loss of HP is gonna stick with you for a while. But it's still a bullet hell. But yeah, the point is that we do still exist in similar spaces. And, once we do come back, the hope is that we'll still have at least a sizable percentage of our original players. And as we bring things back online and bring new content in, we'll bring all of our old players back and maybe some new ones. And the truth is that this, multiplayer bullet hell space is a rather niche space, right? And there's a real possibility that we wind up taking some of their players. So in that respect, I think it's a competitive relationship, if that makes sense. But I also don't think it's like a negative one. I think that in the same ways that, I don't know, whatever MOBA game is fighting with another MOBA game, I don't know, League of Legends versus Dota 2, that type of thing. I mean, not that we're the baby version of that, right? Where it's Realm of the Mad God versus RotF. But I think it's a healthy competition, assuming that all goes well.
That actually used to be how Dota 2 worked. Or not Dota 2, rather, but with Dota 1, some of the original Dota 1 developers, or people that were on the development team for the original mod, were like, like Dota 1 got taken down, or whatever. For some reason it went down. I guess like the Warcraft servers went down or something. And so they're like, hey, let's make League of Legends. So in a sense, League of Legends is...
It's a spin-off of a spin-off of a, yes.
Yeah, it's a
bit of a rabbit hole, but if all goes well anyway, RotF will be the League of Legends of the bullet hell multiplayer permadeath genre. That's a long string of genre tags on Steam, but I'm sure it'll work out.
All right, so what is Ace Games' plan from here on?
So the most immediate plan, obviously, is just to get the game back online, right? We haven't been super public with exactly what that entails, and part of that is because we were still figuring that out ourselves, right? I mentioned to you before, a big portion of this downtime was figuring out exactly what our options were moving forward. How much of the game has to be changed versus left the same versus completely remade from zero to be considered a completely legally independent game from the private server that it once was, right? And part of that included talking to an intellectual property lawyer, which is not something I was really expecting to have to do. So we've been pretty quiet, I would say, about exactly what our plans were until pretty much now, right? But now I get to talk about it a little more. So the most immediate plan, like I said, is to get the game back online. And right now that looks like a few things. Number one, that's redesigning or really just making new sprites for basically everything that was in the game previously. We actually have a license, and not everybody knows this, to use a lot of the sprites that were already in the game, not just the ones that we made. The sprite for the wizard, for example, that's actually not made by Deca or by Wild Shadow or Kabam. That's not made by them. It's actually made by a small design company, studio, person, not sure. But they're called Oryx Design Labs, and that's where the name Oryx comes from, right? And they actually sell a pack with a very large number of the original Realm of the Mad God sprites for maybe $50 or something. It's really cheap, actually. And you can use it commercially. And that covers a very large number of sprites that are already in the game, right? So those sprites we have a license to. All the sprites that we made for RotF, of course, we have a license to. They were made, for us. So what remains is anything that was made during the Kabam era and I guess, after Oryx, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a team working on those sprites first, but the plan is likely to just, for the purpose of being safe, we're probably redesigning literally everything. Or we're not even redesigning, but designing again, literally everything. So that's the first most obvious milestone that we still have to finish before we release the game. The next one is Realm of the Mad God has some obvious stability problems, I would say. Part of what made RotF great is that at its peak, I would say, it was actually more stable than Realm of the Mad God. And then a few patches later, everything broke, and it was not so stable. It was pretty bad, actually. It was still manageable, but we were at a point where we'd have, I mean, server crashes, I would say, about as frequently as Realm of the Mad God has similar issues, and that for us, that's not optimal. And there were a few other just technical issues, including just, we're still on the Adobe Flash client, and we've been working on this Unity port that would connect to the old server. But by the time this DMCA happened, we were like, you know what? Let's just scrap the old server, the old code we were using for the server. Let's just start over. So a few things that this meant was we were going to wipe the whole database, start with basically a new game, right? We're going to work on this Unity port and not work on anything with Flash. We're just going to make the entire game a Unity game. And we're going to take what we thought worked well in RotF and do more of that and do less of what we thought didn't work so well, which may be more Realm of the Mad God-like stuff. So again, first thing was sprites. Second thing is this server rewrite, where again, we're scrapping the old server code and building from the ground up an entirely new server architecture, right? And then the third thing is adding new content that matches our design philosophy for the stuff in RotF that did work, and making sure that it actually plays well. That's pretty general, I would say. Besides the, we're going to remake every sprite, right? That's pretty general, but that's sort of been the plan. I started working on the server rewrite actually before Deca started the DMCA. They sent the DMCA, I want to say, on September 11th, and I started working on the rewrite, I want to say, within the first week of September. So arguably, it's a good time frame. I've been working on that rewrite basically ever since, and basically getting all the features that we loved in old RotF working on the new rewrite, right? That's stuff like the skill tree, that's the rune system, that's some of the good dungeons that we liked a lot. And it's also using the power that we have now with this Unity engine to do stuff that we couldn't do in the past. I have one video clip which I haven't yet shared with people, but I'm planning to send around pretty soon, which is around the new concept for the realms. What we discovered people were doing in RotF, and well, it's not really much of a discovery because we were playing the game too and we're doing the same thing, was the actual realms were in use for basically one thing only. You'd TP to the event, you'd kill the event. If it was a good dungeon, you run the dungeon, and then if not, you just TP to the next event. And that was it. The shore was useless. Midlands got you maybe use Godlands to get some pots, but it was basically useless. The only thing people really spent time doing was farming Godlands, going to events, and running their dungeons. That was the majority of the game. And galaxies, of course. But in terms of the realm, the main thing you used it for was to farm pots and stuff with the gods, and to run events plus their dungeons. So what we figured out there is the obvious answer to that is that the fun part of the game for most people are the events and the dungeons. So the new plan for the realm going forward actually revolves around something that we're calling biomes for now. And I'm going to hopefully release videos soon to show what we're talking about. I sent a one picture spoiler thing in our Discord chat, in the RotF Discord chat, but we didn't elaborate on it past that because we're still deciding if it was possible. And I think we've since decided it's possible. So each realm has a series of biomes, and each biome is controlled by a lord. And these lords are what we used to call events, right? So for example, I don't know, the Mad Jester, right? Or I guess for you guys, the Avatar, the Avatar, right?
Yeah.
Which eventually drops the Shatters portal, presumably. The Avatar would be the Lord of the Shatters biome, if that makes sense. And the entire realm is built of only these biomes. And the goal is to explore the realm and find all of these lords, defeat them, and then if you want to, run their dungeons, if not, not. And then when you clear out all of the lords and their biomes, you don't have to run the dungeons again, just the lords. Then the world boss will spawn, and you get a chance to get what should be the best loot in the game.
So would these be randomly generated maps?
Yep, correct. Randomly generated. So it's which biomes show up will be different each time. Where the lords are placed within their biomes will be different each time. And the other thing that's going to be hopefully pretty cool about it is that we're actually restricting the size of these particular realms to be for a very much smaller number of players. The idea is that you go in with a group of friends or a party or your guild, and you actually start with the entire map not revealed. And then as you walk around and, explore the map and find the lords, you actually reveal the map for your guildmates or your fellow party members or everyone else in the realm. So you're trying to explore the randomly generated map to find the lords and defeat them.
I wish Realm of the Mad God did that for dungeons.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, with the revealing thing. We'll see if that's what we do for all dungeons or just the realms. But the realms are going to have a pretty heavy focus on quote unquote exploration. It's not quite fair for a 2D bullet hell, but exploration ? Where you're trying to find the lords and beat them and then get to the world boss, and it should be pretty fun. There's a whole like world boss spawning sequence that I'm really proud of that involves like a pretty cool hype up sequence. Should be pretty cool.
Is there any
But
voice
we'll see.
acting involved in Revenge of the Fallen?
At the moment, no. We are looking at eventually working on a quest system or something, more questy than kill this particular monster, guys. Um, but for the moment, there's no like NPCs that have more text than just, a few speech bubbles here and there. So I would say no. I don't know if you've seen any of this. You're probably not in the Discord chat.
Actually, I am in the
Um,
Discord.
you are. Did you see any of the OST?
Yeah, I see them in the.
You did.
It might have been in the spoilers tab or whatever, but you guys have been
Yeah, that's
slowly
right.
releasing some of the music that
That's
was
right. Did
designed
you
for
get a
Dungeons.
chance to listen to any of it or no?
I listened to the. I think it was something Necropolis.
Twilight Necropolis. Sure. Okay. So we have a super talented composer named Max. They're incredible. In my humble opinion, they're incredible. And they've been working to slowly, go through the list of dungeons that we have that we know are going to be in the game, when we do the re-release, and making music that, directly connects to the dungeon's theme. So one thing that I thought was pretty funny that they came up with was we have the Scorched Plains dungeon, which is this fiery, burnt dungeon or whatever. And their take on that was to focus on this like fiery, heat, spicy vibe of the dungeon.
Spicy.
And yes, so you know what they did? The spicy. You know what they made?
What?
They made a very Hispanic sounding, like tango type theme. And we thought that was incredible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put a little sombrero over the boss of that dungeon, and we're going to call it intentional. I'm kidding. We're going to do a little more than that to actually make it thematically, relevant. But it's really fun. We're really enjoying seeing how like the music shapes the thematic, and it's a blast.
I still think that's a very unique idea that not a lot of people would think of off the bat. They would try to match the theme directly with what other people perceive of it.
Yeah, right.
So like,
Definitely.
for a lot of people, like say the Abyss of Demons would have a rock or a metal track.
Yeah, of course. You gotta have basically Diablo music playing, right?
Yeah.
Just like punk rock, like just like something, right?
That's a really
Like
interesting
hard
take on
metal,
it.
something. I thought it so yeah. So the Twilight Necropolis music they made, this is a little more standard, but it's just spooky sounding. What I've been loving is just hearing like their immediate response when they hear the name of the dungeon, and then as I show them more content from it and screenshots and the splash art that we make, etc., seeing how the music adjusts accordingly. I think it's really cool. They're really talented.
Do you guys have an official release date for Revenge of the Fallen yet?
The coveted question. The answer is no. I wish we did, obviously, and I've definitely sent the soon TM thing. I've definitely sent that a bunch of times. I will say that the soon TM thing is actually much more real now, because one of the things we were waiting on again is seeing exactly how much we do need to redo. Right, that was one of the biggest question marks that still remained, and having now talked to the intellectual property lawyer and knowing exactly what our milestones should be, we're looking at a much more quantifiable amount of time before the game comes back, and that means that an ETA is much more likely to come out soon. But what I'm saying right now is that I don't have an ETA, but soon we will have an ETA, which is, not great, but it is something.
Yeah, at least you can anticipate date further in the future than just, we'll get it done eventually.
Right, exactly. I mean, in fairness, we will get it done eventually, but it's true. It's much better to have an actual hard date. So on one hand, it's actually pretty cool to see that there's still excitement, even, what is this now? Probably 6 months later, right? September, maybe a little more, right?
Yeah.
So it's good to see that people still want to play it, and it's actually really validating to hear that. But on the other hand, it's not out, so we feel pretty bad. We're doing our best, though.
You guys had a pretty strong community going before the whole DMCA Takedown.
We really did.
So, just like Realm of the Mad God, Revenge of the Fallen has YouTubers who make content for the game. Are there any names that you'd say are prevalent, and are there any perks like exclusive events, or you gift in-game items or cosmetics?
Oh boy. So, first of all, I guess huge shout out is what we're doing here as well to some of the YouTubers and content creators that did stuff for RotF. I would put No, Valix, Mew, Kevils, they're only really big ones. I mean, back in the day, Hyporo, so that turned disastrous pretty quickly. Radical also turned disastrous. I mean, there were a lot of people who were making actually really good content for the game, and those would definitely be at the top of my head. Just if you were to ask me to just list people, and they all made at different times really really good content for us. They also did something really great, which was that they made us that we didn't really have to not that we spend money on advertising, but we didn't really have to even like go out and like be like, hey guys, try our game. We didn't even have to, right? People watch a video of a bullet hell, whether it's Realm of the Mad God or something else, and then suddenly recommended by Kebble's 44,000 views, check out this 1616 guide for the Star Force, and everyone's like, what? So it was really, really, really cool to see in my own recommended feed, for example, RotF content, and huge shout out to those guys. As for perks to being a content creator, especially one that's actually like successful, generally speaking, there weren't any direct perks. We did tend to respond, and this is certainly, I don't even want to say this is intentional, right? This is anything, if anything, this is a bad thing, right? But if we knew someone in the community that was relatively like, reputable or well known, right? We tended to respond to their questions and stuff first, because also it means we know that they're more experienced with the game, right? And we know that they have, or their insight and opinion is actually really valuable, especially because they do have an audience, right? So if they think the game is terrible right now, that's probably pretty bad. So we definitely did, even subconsciously, like prioritize their thoughts and their opinions, stuff like that. And we did do events around them, right? We hosted arenas and stuff, especially for streamers. Oh yeah, you got to talk about PD as well if you're going to talk about streamers. He was up there as well. So we ran events, we did giveaways occasionally, stuff like that. But we didn't usually just like straight up just like give like, oh, here's a YouTuber rank. Like we didn't have that or anything like that. We did try to in some way compensate people who are doing a really good job showing what RotF can be and what it is.
So on the subject of content creators, we want to talk about Kevils. Would you like to
My boy.
talk about Kevils' leave from the team?
My boy Kevils. Yeah, I'd love to. So Kevil's leave is definitely a complicated situation, I would say, for sure. The first thing is he was I would call him the lead designer, lead gameplay designer, content, something to that effect, who was especially responsible for the creation of the dungeon, the Twilight Necropolis, which was one of our, like, by far most successful dungeons. Like, it was the one that most people realized, wait a minute, this is like a game. This is a game, Mm-hmm. So, full credit to Kevils there. He was like a ball of passion and creativity and determination and all sorts of other things. The reality with Kevils was that determination and that passion and that vision also for what the game was going to be didn't always necessarily line up with our determination, our passion, and our vision for what the game would be, but B, also the amount of time that we had in the day to work on these things. Running a multiplayer game turns out to be really hard. Who would have thought? And there were times where things just like, for example, broke or were unbalanced, things like that. And, we needed to switch off who was going to work on things, who wasn't. And it wasn't always like an even distribution, for example. And Kevils was always, right there. We got to fix it right now. And it got really stressful, honestly. And, his determination and his passion and all those things ultimately did not always mix well with our schedules and our abilities and all these other things. And sometimes it became a rather stressful environment. And ultimately, I think the decision was that, as much as, first of all, we loved having Kevils on the team and Kevils loved being on the team, there were also a lot of reasons why he'd probably be more successful working on something else, and we'd probably be more successful working without him. So the decision was pretty much mutual. He did a really good amount of work, as a side note. Like people on YouTube definitely blew what he did and didn't do way out of proportion, right? You have people saying like, Kevils did nothing, he was useless and just a toxic. And it's like, what are you saying, dude? He was like responsible for Twilight Necropolis. Like, all of our staff members worked in that dungeon, don't get me wrong, but like that was his vision, his idea. You cannot say he did nothing. On the other hand, you had people on his YouTube channel being like, I can't believe Deca did this to Kevils and his game. We're like, well, it's not really his game. That's not quite right. But so I know it's YouTube comment section we're talking about, and I know it's not always going to be a great place to be, but it was definitely interesting because there was definitely a wide range of opinions of what Kevils was and wasn't doing. And the answer is he was doing more or less, or I'd actually say a little more than what he was required to do, but he was doing a lot, and we were sad to see him go, but also we understood why it was best for all of us. Definitely. And as a side note, actually, he's now working on a project called Desolate Lands, which is another multiplayer bullet hell permadeath type thing, from what I understand. I've talked to the lead developer of that project a lot, and I've helped him out with a few code things here and there. I think that project looks really freaking cool. So shout out to Desolate Lands and Kevils and Polar who's working on that project, all those people. I really hope that project as well. I think they're really promising. Check them out.
I gotta go look at that later. That sounds really interesting.
Desolate Lands. They have some testing out, and it looks. I mean, I don't know. I saw some people streaming it, and I was like, damn, this looks fun.
Is it available for early access on Steam or maybe Greenlight?
No, so they had just a few testing links where you can just download the client, but it's like alpha, where it's I don't even know if it's officially like a testing period. They have like 2-day testing periods basically, and that's it. They take it off for renovations.
Oh, that sounds like the whole Survive By thing. Did you ever see when that went out?
Yes, yeah, we talked about Survive by last time actually. Remember?
Oh yeah, yeah, we touched on it, but we didn't go too in depth. Besides,
Complaining about the design,
yeah,
the visuals.
oh yeah,
But it's too bad they went off.
yeah. I mean, they're still an alpha game. They had a certain idea in mind, and they wanted to execute it somewhat stubbornly. But yeah, it's a topic for a different time.
For sure.
Let's get back on Realm of the Mad God. So, what do you think about the concept of one-shot monsters, like say the Ice Sphere?
Ooh. Generally, okay, one-shot monsters I think are a very acceptable game mechanic. I think those are, if anything, a positive game mechanic. I disagree when they're on monsters like the Ice Sphere, right? I think it should be very easily well communicated when a bullet is going to one-shot you, or a projectile is going to one-shot you. And the alternative is, I think it's okay if a monster can one-shot you if there are several projectiles that fly in a specific pattern, and if you stand in the worst possible spot, you happen to get hit by all of them at once. An example of this would be in RotF, we had the Yeti, which was an event that had a specific shot pattern where there's I think basically 4 spots, like 4 like adjacent spots, where if you stand there, you'll get hit by basically 3 different projectiles, and if you get hit by all 3, you die. I have no problem with that. I think it's good game design, and I have no problem with, like the type of thing where like think of like Lotto like doing is like no charge up, right? Where it turns red. If you have that much warning, I think that's also an okay projectile to one shot. If it's clearly communicated, you should be running away right now. I think that's also acceptable. When you have like, Ice Sphere, I would vote no.
There's one person in particular, a consultant for Wild Shadow. I won't say his name. I'm not sure if he looks at this podcast, but he defined mechanics like the Ice Sphere a inflated difficulty mechanic, in which inflated difficulty would mean things that can kill you unexpectedly, but that aren't fair to the player because it doesn't allow them enough time to react.
That doesn't sound like inflated difficulty. That just sounds like, well, I mean that's fair. I think it's a difficulty. I wouldn't even call it a difficulty curve. I'd call it like a difficulty like cliff. If that makes sense.
Cliff.
Well, right, because if you don't know what the Ice Sphere does, right, you're going to have no idea that that's a threatening monster, right?
Yep.
So the argument there would be there's not a curve, but rather a cliff, like a steep incline, or really just like a right angle almost, where if you don't know what the monster does, you're just going to die, guaranteed. But then once you do know what it does, they're honestly not really much of a threat. It's pretty easy to avoid,
Yeah, true.
So I'd call it a difficulty cliff, where you have a bit of a right angle thing, where once you know what it does, there's no way you're going to die to it. But is it really good game design to have a permadeath game where the first person who goes into the dungeon is basically guaranteed to die? As in the first person who doesn't know what the dungeon is yet.
Of course not.
I don't personally think that's good game design. I think it's better to communicate clearly what monsters can and can't do. And I think the beautiful thing about like a bullet hell in particular, what makes bullet hell so fun for most players, is that these things usually are well communicated, right? Where this is exactly the attack the monster is going to do. It's well telegraphed, and then the game still whoops your ass, right? That's what makes these games so fun, where there's a very small margin for error, and you have to, maneuver yourself correctly. So I think it's pretty unfortunate when there's a game or a bullet hell that doesn't really communicate that well, personally. But I don't think that precludes a game or a bullet hell from having one-shot mechanics. I think that's acceptable.
So, a topic that you'll really like touching on, something you may be aware of. There's a lot of features in Revenge of the Fallen. I mean, you're the developer of it, that have been recreated by Deca Games in Realm of the Mad God. Do you have any word on that?
I have many words. Ooh, where to begin? So, again, this is keeping in mind that I actually have a lot of respect for Deca. I think they've done very well with what they've been given. But yes, let's touch on a few of the things that I think people pretty quickly identified as at minimum inspired from RotF, right? The first one would definitely be heroic dungeons. RotF for a long time has had a feature that we call the epic dungeons, which were mostly just the bosses, but also just harder versions of dungeons that already existed in the game. Well, enough said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had the epic oodle, we had basically practically every dungeon that they made into these heroic dungeons. We already had an epic version of. In fact, when Bikiribox /Haze/Tawar whatever made his video of the epic dungeons, or sorry, the heroic dungeons, people in the comments were already saying, "Yo, try RotF. This is just their idea. This is just their content." And I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty problematic."
Some
That's keeping in mind that we talked about it last time. I actually like the heroic dungeons a lot, but part of why I like them is because that's just the design choice that we made for our game. So it's definitely unfortunate. It's hard to say exactly how much is, quote unquote inspired versus taken versus coincidental, but that's the first instance of several pieces of ideas or content that we have that they suddenly now have. So it's hard to, blanket call this all coincidental. That's certainly the first instance, and I have more. Um, the second one, which I thought was pretty obvious, was what they're now calling their reactive proc system, which is, for example, where you'll hit something and there's a percent chance for something to happen, right? Percent chance for something to spawn, or percent chance to heal this amount, right? That is a direct copy of our primal effect system. The primal effect system was you could get items that were labeled as primals, it was a level above legendaries, where they have usually some special effect, whether it's a chance to do something or a guaranteed effect this, right? Maybe it gives you permanent speedy, right? Which is more like an equip effect, but stuff like that, right? Where there's percent chances for things to happen. When you take damage, you have a percent chance to heal this much HP, right? Or you have a chance to get armor, right? Stuff like that. And that was part of what made those items so exciting to play with. They were pretty cool mechanics. And now they have this reactive proc system, which is functionally identical, though they're not leaning into it that much. They've only had a few items that use it. It still feels like a bit of a, shot for shot, copy of our primal system.
Yeah, it's the alien in Realm of the Mad Guys, the alien items, right?
Is that right? Frankly, I ever since RotF, I know it was a little while ago, but ever since RotF went down, I've been mostly just heads down working on that, so I haven't got to pay as much attention to Realm-specific content. But that sounds right. That sounds right.
All right. So, Deca, as a lot of people would agree, don't have the best anti-cheat systems. Would you like to talk about Revenge of the Fallen's anti-cheat systems and maybe compare it a little bit to what Deca Games has?
The first thing I would say is that Deca's anti-cheat system, especially for what we'll call God mode cheats, which is where projectiles pass through you, right, is a little over-aggressive, I would say. When people have latency issues, they just get hit. Like, you can dodge a projectile on your screen, and then you get hit anyway if you have latency issues. That seems pretty bad. RotF had a similar system to what they use for server-sided projectiles, but we took an approach that gives the player a little bit more leeway, if that makes sense. That said, I mentioned this earlier, the initial release of our anti-cheat system resulted in that's probably several hundred characters dying from invisible bullets, so it definitely wasn't a smooth release. It was actually really disastrous. But yeah, it was really bad actually. But we fixed it. Don't worry, we fixed it, and we only made all of our players really mad. And ultimately we found a pretty good anti-God mode system that correctly dealt with players that were cheating, but didn't at all affect the experience of players that weren't, and we were pretty happy with it. Like, the amount of times or the number of times that you see players post on Reddit where they're playing Realm, their screen freezes or their internet breaks for a second, they close the client, they reopen it, and their character is gone. That's just horrible, and our system never let that happen. So
it's something that usually shocks a lot of the players that experience it, and
it's terrible, dude. How can you have permadeath like that? Huh.
It has. I've seen it have lasting effects on certain players. Like, there are players that actually
people just quit.
Yeah, well, the people who don't quit, they'll lag. They'll close their client and they'll open it again and go oh, I'm really anxious. I don't want to see my character gone again, because it's something they didn't
I mean, some
before.
people see their character gone to lag and they just quit the game. Quit the game.
Yeah.
It's when you have permadeath and then lag that can influence your character's fate that hard. It's just terrible.
And then a hard line on no character revivals, just to boot.
I mean, right? I mean, part of how it's bad is Steambird's Alliance. You're probably familiar with it.
Yeah.
It was made by X-Realm with the Miniguy developers, and it was a basically modern, very fun, actually, in my opinion, multiplayer bullet hell. They actually are looking to remove permadeath.
I heard that was already removed.
And was it already done? I wasn't sure if the change actually went through already, but the justification, I get this, was basically that with the exception of people that really already, love and know the genre and know the game, what happens is people boot up the game for the first time, they play it, they're having fun, they're collecting their loot, they die, they never play the game again. And that's a terrible player turnover rate. So that makes a lot of sense. If you can imagine the same thing happening with players that actually haven't even experienced that yet, but instead they lag, because no offense, Realm of the Mad Gods, like latency and lag issues, frankly, are problematic. They lag, they die to the lag, and they never play the game again. That's actually a huge problem. I don't know if the solution is to do what Steamverse did and just remove permadeath, 'cause that's a pretty core mechanic, but like, there's no denying that that's a huge issue.
There's got to be some type of leniency, I feel, on Deca's part. They should be understanding to certain character deaths, like, say, the Ice Tomb one.
I don't know if it's true, but I don't actually know, frankly, if doing character revivals is the solution. We've been yelled at by our players so much for this, but it's just the truth, which is that if you started doing character revivals, unless they have like literal videos of the lag into the death, the end result is that people will message you and say, hey, I lost my character that had 2 mil fame and this primal item, and this necklace of fangs and whatever other great items. And then the truth will be actually that they didn't have any of those items, and they're just trying to get the items in a quote unquote revival. That's certainly not most people, but the fact that some people could just swoop in and claim that and potentially break the entire economy, by the way, while they do it, makes it so that we can't actually realistically do character revivals unless there's video like proof showing exactly what happened. So it's definitely something that Deca and also we have gotten and will continue to get flack for. But I don't think any of us see an immediately obvious alternative to what we've been doing. So it's unfortunate, but it's how it is. One thing I actually did want to talk about was like the visual changes we're doing. So I think I sent you a short video of it, and it's also visible in our like spoiler chat or whatever, which is these lighting changes. So a lot of these like bullet hell games, right, especially like think Gungeon in particular, have really like cool lighting systems, right, where it's kind of dark and you have pretty dynamic lights and stuff like that. And we wanted to see if that was at all possible for RotF, because it turns out that when you have a game that has this many, for example, think like torch objects or flame objects like that, there's actually a lot of opportunity to do really cool looking lighting. And now that we have the power of Unity and not the power of Adobe Flash, there's actually a good chance it can be done. So I started working, I want to say, probably when we first started doing the Unity port, right, on making lighting actually work properly, and it didn't work at all. We were using a specific, shader to make our outlines draw and stuff like that, and none of it was working with the lighting. So we just didn't do it. And then recently we upgraded something internally. We used the latest version of Unity, and now we use some new shader graph thing. And the point is, it actually gave me the opportunity to get lighting to actually work properly. And I started testing it where like projectiles, for example, emit like a small light to things nearby. And I was like, actually, this looks so cool. What? I was so excited. So I took a few clips of, just some test shots I was looking at. And it actually looks really cool. So we have, for example, we had these like torch things in the Nexus, and now they emit light. And, you can see these little like pools around it of light. And it's like, the goal will be to make it, subtle enough that it's not distracting, but still really pretty. But it's something I'm really, really excited about. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but just the amount of visual flair that it adds is actually really cool.
Have you played Starbound before?
I have not.
So Starbound, Chucklefish added really nice dynamic lighting to that game. It's a major part of what makes it unique. Shit, I actually don't have much else to comment on that because I haven't played the recent additions.
Okay, I mean, I've played. It's not Starbound. I've played Stardew Valley. I've played another Chucklefish game, and I know the lighting in that game is fantastic.
Yeah, it's not used to the full extent that Starbound does, though, just because it's not like this 2D side-scroller type, open world game.
Yeah, I gotcha. I mean, Stardew Valley is a top-down game, so there's still lighting used in different ways, but...
I always really like the graphic style that Chucklefish chooses for the games as well.
Me too. I think Stardew Valley is like a masterclass in like top-down, non-3D design. I think it's really good. I talked before, obviously, about the OST being a thing. The goal is actually to have a soundtrack or a music theme for every dungeon and every world, actually. And if all goes well and that gets done relatively quickly, we may also look to add specific themes for each boss fight. One thing that we did in the past releases, which we've shown off pretty extensively, is the realm has a few different pretty distinct difficulties. At least the old one did. Again, the new one's a bit of a different design, right? But the old one had a few different distinct difficulties, right? Obviously, the Godlands is the most dangerous part of the realm. The shore is the easiest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we actually had 3 different instrumentations of the same song or the same track. Each one like progressively more like intense or complex than the last. And we did this trick where as you walked around through the realm, as you got into more difficult areas, the music would seamlessly fade into, the more difficult and hard and intense track until you got to the Godlands where it was actually like, intense. And that was a really, really cool thing we got to do. The hope is that we'll eventually be able to make themes for each dungeon's boss as well, or bosses, that do a similar thing. And it should be pretty fun. It's kind of like, in like, I don't know, take Super Mario 64, for example, where in Dire Dire Docks, you jump into the water and suddenly the music is like underwater sounding.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually using the same trick. There's 2 different versions of the track. One with underwater sounding things, one without, and then there's audio fading.
I was gonna bring up Square Enix because for Nier Automata they had dynamic music, yeah, at varying levels. So first it would just be like the melody, and then the drums would come in, and then if you had a boss, then absolutely everything.
It's just like that. Yep, exact same.
I think they named it Chaos was the 3rd level
Chaos.
of intensity of the music.
Okay. Yeah, we unfortunately just had 1, 2, and 3, but that's cool too.
Were you guys working on anything before the DMCA takedown happened, besides, say, like, server changes?
So we were working on a number of different things. One of them was actually, this is pretty sad. One of them was actually a dungeon that was going to be worked on with Kebbles, but before he left. That one's actually cancelled, unfortunately. Just because, among other things, Kebbles isn't on the team anymore, right? We were also working on this other game, which I mentioned to you last time. We were working on a game that was actually completely separate from RotF. It was going to be probably a single player game, and we had a decent amount of like scripting, and not just scripting code wise, but scripting like dialogue and content wise already done. And we had a decent amount of engine code done. We weren't using Unity for this one. We were writing our own thing on top of Miniguy. And we actually, I don't know, I'm pretty proud of the amount of work that we had done on it already. And it's too bad that, the Unity port and stuff has now taken precedence because of the DMCA. But that was also a project we were working on at the time. We also did, or we were going to participate in a game jam. We had a little platformer demo going, and then, again, time constraints and stuff like that. And also the fact that we're in different time zones, right? Skilly and Mike are both in, well, they're both basically in the European time zone. Skilly's in the UK one, but, they're on the other side of the world, basically. So the time zone thing is also a bit of a problem for that. So didn't work out perfectly. But those were all things we got to work on before. But other than that, I mean, most of our focus has actually been on RotF and on getting things back up.
Do you guys plan on continuing that single-player project?
The hope is yes. Once RotF is back online and once everything is stable, and that's a dangerous word to use, stable. But once everything is more or less working and we feel confident that, 1 or 2 of us can step away at a given time, the hope is that, yes, we'll be able to resume working on that. Skilly in particular, actually, I guess I'll also say this, Skilly in particular wants to work more on single-player games. He and I have both been what I guess you could call like the point guard or whatever for RotF at different times. And I think he and I both know, pretty uniquely, at least in comparison to the best people on the team, like what that does to you. It's actually a really, really draining experience. He talks about times, and I can attest to these times because I did them too, where, he's staying up till, 3 a.m. plus trying to fix a server issue, potentially missing classes or coursework for it. I mean, it's actually a really, really mentally, physically draining experience, to be honest with you. And Skilly, justifiably, is leaning away from doing that again. So he really wants to work more on a single-player game. Actually, in fact, he hasn't been doing much work on RotF recently. Since the DMCA takedown, especially because, that's also his main source of income gone, he's had to work his own job and stuff. So he actually hasn't really been working on RotF, like, at all, actually. So that's also unfortunately part of the timeline changes as well, and I don't blame him for it, right? He's got to have money to put food on the table and stuff. I have no hard feelings about it. And none of us do, we all understand. But it's just, it's just reality for now. And, Mike is also, always available to work on stuff. He's not working on as much foundational stuff, but he's always around to run changes by and stuff. So we're working. But the thought is that once this starts to come back online, most likely, especially because Skilly's already not really wanted to work directly on, these multiplayer games, he'll probably be quick to jump onto a different single player project with Ace.
All right. So last thing is, do you want to say anything to the viewers, the audience? Market something, maybe like an open position.
Oh boy.
Advertise something.
So I can do a few things. The first thing I'll say, and this is going to sound a bit like a broken record because we haven't updated it in a bit, but the first thing I'll say is please check out our development blog at aced.gg. That's aced.gg. We hope to update it a lot more often really soon with our immediate plans for the future and some of the things I've discussed in this podcast, such as the realm changes. Also, of course, check out RotF.io for the main game. It's not online right now, but that's a thing. And also go there to join our Discord chat. As for open positions, right now we have 3 dedicated spriters working on the remaining legacy content that we'd like to create all new designs for. In the interest of speed, we may be looking to take on 1 or 2 more, and we are, of course, also, it is also commissioned work. If anyone's interested in that and they have, some portfolio work or some examples to show me, hit me up on Discord.
Links and information to all of this will be in the description of this video or episode or wherever you're viewing this from. Special thanks to our patrons. We have MG Oryx and Adam Shogun. You guys keep this podcast going. If you'd like to email us with any inquiries, you can email us at decadebrief@gmail.com, which is quickly going to change. So...
yeah, hold up. Still Deca Debrief? Uh-oh.
Shout out to DJ Quad, who produced our intro and outro music. And thank you to our guest.
Thank you for having me.